Yes.
All right, I am with Lencis and Ester, and we're going to talk to them both together today. And I believe Esther was in our last conversation with her mother, and we had some time spent in both. And one of the things we thought about talking about today was forgiveness. And I was just mentioning that forgiveness is about being forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of not forgiving is about being forgetting. And the forgetting is not only taking, but it's forgetting that we're doing it, thinking that somehow we can pretend we're not doing it. And it was the person that did the thing that we still don't like that stopped doing it while we've been doing the thing that we've been doing that we don't really like because the impact on us is magnified, and think it's still them doing it when they stopped years ago, very often, decades sometimes.
Yes.
Now, Esther, you don't have decades behind you other than one. So, I mean, you're at a disadvantage, but you're at the advantage, like we talked about originally when I said something to you about the fact that you were very receptive to ideas that adults very often fight. And you seem surprised to hear that, which wouldn't come as a surprise to me, because if it's natural for you to hear it and see it, you might also presume it would be natural for everybody else. And yet this addictive condition is a very unnatural approach to thinking.
Right.
So you were going to say something, Lencis, when we started to broach this as our topic today.
Yes. When I received that text message, that long letter that I shared with you, I thought that my experience with that situation, it was like done. But when I had that experience again, I started feeling pain about my past, about what happened more than 14 years ago. More than years.
And this was about a relationship that broke up, didn't go where you thought it might, and he was somewhat either apologetic or dismissive and came around later to share with you his thoughts in those texts.
Because I remember when I was married and I was happy. I was living the life that I wanted to. I was happy 100%. So when I had to experience that situation, I was confused. I didn't know what was going on. I had no experience at all.
And it was worse because she didn't understand English.
Oh my gosh, exactly. So when
I couldn't translate for her because I was just learning how to talk. Yes. I was too. Imagine that.
So in that moment, when I met that person, I wanted to change the situation and say, you know what, I want a man with me to build something, but I had to face my separation with my ex-husband because all that problem that he was facing. And I was, oh my God, confused. So I was confused. And then I thought that chapter in my life was done. Even everything, it was over, like everything. But when that person bring that conversation again.
When he brought it up.
He sent the text.
Exactly. I felt like nothing happened in 14 years. Like I never did anything to improve my life. I just saw myself in the same circle.
Yes.
To me to that circle. And I want, Jack, please, can you help me to understand a little bit this?
Well, first of all, let's make the point that for 14 years, you thought everything was fine. I
worked so hard to forgive, to move, like to improve myself as a human, because what I experienced with people was they relate me with my ex-husband situation.
Yeah.
He was so famous, and I was, that famous going, como se dice, affect me in many, many ways. All my friends just disappear. People reject me.
No one trusted her anymore.
No, and people reject me many, many, many times. And
But during that 14 years, before you got that text,
exactly,
you didn't spend a lot of time thinking that there was anything wrong. you thought that it was resolved and it was behind you and it was past? Or did you feel the thoughts about it like you're talking about them today?
I had to think something is wrong here. Let me improve my life.
When did you think that?
14 years ago.
At the beginning of the breakup. Okay.
I was trying to see, okay, what is going on?
Trying to make sure that I could live a stable life.
Exactly. In the same
Right.
time, I was trying to do well with my life.
When did you get the text?
I think
I can check the date.
1 week ago.
Yeah, 1 week.
So it's recent. It's 14 years later. And you noticed when you got it that there was a lot triggered by it that you hadn't noticed was happening.
Correct.
Okay. So think about the idea that my experience is that most of what troubles me are the things I don't think I'm thinking. So when I think it's all okay, it's because I've made a decision it's okay. And why would I make a decision it's okay if it was okay? I wouldn't have to decide anything. It would just be okay. So what am I using? My ability to make believe.
Denial.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Esther.
Denial. That's called denial.
Denial. Yeah. So I'm using denial as though it's reality, as though my thinking can undo this greater experience I'm having, which shows that thinking is just a limited performance that I'm doing. It's something I'm doing in a very limited basis, but it's affecting my entire experience, and not only mine, everyone else's too. I like that. That was a harmonic hum.
And Jack, I feel sensitive. So I want to cry because I push myself so hard to be like perfect, to do not make mistakes, to raise Esther the best that I could do by myself, because my ex never helped me. Yeah, he never helped me. Okay, he sent money. Okay, but
he was never there for me as a dad.
Exactly. So for me, as a woman, as a mom, that is painful.
So the circumstances were difficult.
Exactly.
So let's say that the circumstances are just what's happening. And one thing that we're not controlling are the circumstances, because they involve everybody everywhere. In some way, everybody everywhere are participating in all that's happening. Even when it seems to be so narrow as to only affect our life. Right? So if that's happening, and I'm thinking about it in ways that aren't true, because I'm thinking about it in ways that seem to condemn me, I'm thinking about the circumstances as condemning me rather than the thinking about them that I'm doing that may be contemptible. Because it's easy to be overwhelmed if you've been used to pretending things that are happening aren't happening. Right? My experience was that I'd gotten so good at pretending things were the way I thought they were, that I was living in a complete bubble as to how they actually were. And realized that it was only what I thought they were that I thought they were, rather than seeing that they are what they are regardless of what I think. And I have the freedom to think whatever I want. And if I can think they're not even happening, that's a pretty broad bit of freedom I have to even think that, right? It's pretty generous of something to allow me to do that. That would be a pretty loving source that I would have to allow me to go so far as to make believe that what's happening isn't even happening while it's happening. And what I'm thinking isn't what I'm thinking while I'm thinking it. And it seems silly. And yet, when you think it's real and you think it's true, you think it's the only thing happening. And it's very depressing. And there's mourning attached to that. There's trauma attached to that, because it's terrifying to imagine that we're alone in the universe with these problems. And we're not. We're thinking about thoughts that are alone because they have no basis in reality. They're not even alone because they can't be, they're no part of it. It's a non-existent delusional idea. And that's what insanity is, really imagining that something that's delusional, which is literally an illusion being thought of as reality, is real. It's the commitment I have to the reality of it that causes the problem. And that's why I call it my own reality, and then argue with everybody else about their reality, because their reality isn't my reality. And it misses the point that reality isn't an optional. It isn't something that comes and goes because of what we think about it. What comes and goes the way we think about it is our mentality,
Oh my
our
God.
ability to function. It's not reality that's changing. It's our inability to function mentally. So we
Exactly.
become dysfunctional. We don't work very well. We start failing at things and think, of course I fail because I have nothing. I am nothing. I don't live up to the expectations other people have. And all that is thoughts that they think are real. And you've now thought their thoughts are real. So now you have to live up to their thoughts when you can't even live up to the thoughts you're having.
Yes. How can I tell my thought
Yeah.
to apply the forgiveness in this situation? Because for a moment I thought that I was a failure. Because when I read that text message,
Well, congratulations.
oh,
You know where you want to fail is when things are impossible. To think they're possible and think there's hope in it is to think hopelessness is hopeful. It's crazy. And to have faith in it and wishful thinking is to think somehow I'm going to turn it into what I think it should be and would be and could be and may be if I just keep thinking harder about it. That's exactly what obsessive thinking is. It's the constant idea that if I can become completely engulfed in the flames of thought, somehow I'll fix the problem, when in fact I'm the one creating the imaginary problem to begin with.
Oh,
wow.
So interesting though, Lencis, you feel the grief in the morning. And I'm going to tell you, it has nothing to do with the circumstances. Those circumstances were sort of like going to a movie and being affected by the movie and seeing how it relates to your other relationships, being moved emotionally by the movie and coming out of the movie and saying, wow, I can really be better with these people. I can really do things. You've learned a lesson. You've seen things. And movies are great ways to do that because you're observing it.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting is we're always observing our thoughts. But when I think my thoughts are reality, I think I'm in my thoughts. I think I become my thoughts. I think my life depends on my thoughts. And all of a sudden, I have all these voices in my head representing those thoughts. And I think each one of those voices is alive. I've created a whole movie in my own head that I'm observing like I'm in the audience and claiming now to be in it. And I have no other choice but to continue doing the insane thing that gives me the impression all I am is what I think, when thinking is simply something I do. It isn't who I am. It defines my thinking. It doesn't define me. It defines the capacity I have and the incapacity or dysfunction that I'm expressing in the thinking I'm doing. And to see that honestly is to start to see that we have been missing the moments in terms of our full capacity to be aware. And we've been missing the people in those moments and the grand nature of their existence by reducing them to only what we think. And when I'm thinking pitiful thoughts, I think everyone else is pitiful. And I think they're all ugly when I'm thinking ugly thoughts. I don't see the beauty. I only see what I'm looking through, this lens I'm creating.
Yes. Wow.
So there's a mourning in that, a grieving in that. And you know where that grieving occurs? In the present. And you know what I'm busy trying to do in the present? Avoid what's happening to make believe that it's something else, somewhere else with someone else. And that what I need is to be somewhere else with something else and someone else, or more or less of something else.
Yes.
And it's all being caused by this central idea that the thinking is reality rather than imagined, rather than something I can easily change, rather than something that I do, rather than something I am, and start to actually notice that that is not the highest and best use for our thinking, any more than cutting my foot off with a shovel would be the point of having a shovel. It's for digging a hole. It's not for chopping my feet up.
Exactly. Wow.
And that's kind of a ridiculous metaphor, but the point is, it is no more ridiculous than the insanity we impose on our experience by making believe the circumstances are the problem and the people and what they're doing are the problem, but how we're seeing them do it, what we're thinking of them doing it. That's where the source is. There's nothing that impacts us more than what happens in our own brain.
Exactly.
And the mourning is actually an honest appraisal of the sadness we have for doing what we're doing and hurting our potential to do better and do more and help people in real terms.
Mm-hmm.
So we're helping ourselves to the idea that we're so little and we're so nothing that we have nothing to offer them. So what do? We start acting in ways that are horrifying and
Mm-hmm.
pitiful and demoralizing and immoral and unethical and think it's the only thing we can do. It's the basis of corruption. It's the basis of this idea that I can bend my ethics because it's my only choice and I deserve to take what I can get rather
Mm-hmm.
than notice I've already been given everything. I got it all. If I have it all, I don't have to do something.
Exactly. So in this case, how can I apply that forgiveness? Oh, Esther is bella. She helped me so
Well,
much.
it's having things as they are. Starting to notice
Okay.
that things have always been as they are. The things out there don't have any mind that they're thinking about, I'm trying to be something. They just simply are something. The circumstances, the asphalt on the road when you drive isn't saying, I'm here for you today. It's simply being there. What you do with it is up to you. You could walk on it, you could ride a bike on it, you could, whatever it is, it's a path you can take in many ways that you choose.
Exactly.
But it's doing what it's doing because it knows exactly what to do because it isn't thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So consider the things that are happening are just happening.
Yes.
And how you've been thinking about it is what's been giving you that sense of condemnation and sadness. But the sadness, if you read it correctly, it's a body language and say, I'm sad about what I'm doing. I actually know that I'm doing something that's sad. And to begin to admit that is to admit in the present, begin to align the thinking with what's actually happening rather than what you're imagining will someday happen if you keep thinking more and more and more of the wrong thoughts, hoping you'll someday get there. Typically within addiction, even after people recover from drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex, whatever it is, they're still trying to get someplace, which is an indication they don't think they're in that place. So if we're always there because it's the only place we can make the problem up, it's the exact same place we can come to terms with the problem by forgiving it, literally being forgiving what I'm doing as what I'm doing, as I'm doing it. And it's really the presence of being. It's saying, if it is this and I'm creating it, I have no obligation to continue. Because when I see it clearly, it becomes obvious that it's ridiculous to continue.
Mm-hmm.
When I see it as something I shouldn't be doing, I think there's nothing I can do about it. And thus I think it's the only thing I can continue doing. So that's the unholy trinity is I have nothing to do with it.
Trinity.
There's nothing I can do about it. And as a result, I'm just going to continue doing the same stupid thing forever and wonder why I feel stupid. Because it feels idiotic because it is idiotic. Not because I am idiotic, because how I'm utilizing my thinking is idiotic. Just like if I thought a car was to be driven backward, I would have a tough time getting places. I would be running into things. I would be and saying, why is everybody else driving so crazy? So if the present is present, then that present is the same for that guy in that place that he is now. He's somewhere, right? So we know that. So now we know what we need to know about him. And those people that said those things are somewhere thinking what they're thinking right now. And we're not going to change what they're thinking, but we can absolutely change everything everyone's thinking by becoming honest about what we're thinking and not adding more drama to the grid, the electrical charged grid of what we're part of. We can begin to actually bring inspiration into that grid, which is bringing light. And you know what? The one thing that never survives light is darkness.
Oh my gosh.
Never.
Yes.
That's why flashlights are so popular.
Yes. I love it. Oh my gosh. Yes.
So, and here's the other thing. It's always been that way while you've been thinking it wasn't. So we literally think reality goes away when we're thinking those things because we really think what we're thinking is real. And all of a sudden, to really see it clearly is to say, no, reality never changed. What changed was my thinking about reality. My mentality changed. I became depressed. I became upset. I became conflicted. I felt like I was alone. What am I feeling? The lonely thought I'm having that has no basis. None. It has no basis in reality. It's all made up in my own ability to consider and imagine things. Now,
Mhm.
imagination, looked at accurately, is innovative, creative. We can come up with all sorts of solutions that are inspired rather than function from the desperation of this idea that our thinking is reality. And now we've got to try to overcome everyone and everything all the time in this reactive mode of defensiveness and defiance and denial and delusion. And
Mhm.
we're dispossessed, literally. We feel discontent, uneasy. We're never comfortable where we are because we think we don't belong there. When what doesn't belong there is the thinking we're doing because it has no place, literally has no place. So we feel when we think we're our thoughts, we have no place in reality. Well, we couldn't even think that if we didn't have a place.
Exactly.
We're always in the place thinking that and then imagining we're not there. How
Mhm.
crazy is that? We couldn't think it if we weren't here.
And it's very interesting, Jack, because according
Esther's yawning. She just had a hit. she got tired.
I she was working a lot yesterday with the school. So I want Esther to share with Jack the conversation that you have with the ¿cómo se llama la niña?
Teacher?
Darlene.
Okay.
She had a very interesting experience like
Well, I haven't finished the conversation, but basically in my school, when we have live lesson, right, we can use the chat. So we can chat to other kids. We can't see each other or talk to each other through the microphone, but we can connect through that little box. And so there was a girl in, I think it was my English 10 class last year, and her name is Darlene. And I normally like people, there's a lot of kids in this school with really unique names. So I wanted to like talk more with her. And today we're still going to the same school together, obviously, or else we wouldn't be talking. And she was texting me, well, not texting me, she was emailing me about school, and she was asking me what is it like for me with algebra in math class, because for her, I can actually read what she said. She said something very interesting.
Mhm.
She was saying that her it's a lot different on the computer. It's not as long. Says she was wondering like what is it like for me, because for her she gets wait, no, that's what I said. It's funny. For her, it's tricky. She said that she can't grasp any of the concepts right now, and she was asking me if I had any tips. And so I was telling her, well, just for me personally, it takes a long time as well, and I just take all the notes as possible. But she said something really interesting. She said that for her, it takes her a really long time to finish a math lesson because of all the note taking. And she was kind of nervous about, she hasn't booked she hasn't booked a meeting with her teacher yet, who is actually, okay, remember when I was talking to you about that algebra teacher who treated
Yeah.
me very disrespectfully? Her algebra teacher is that same teacher, and she was saying
Right.
something interesting, how she can't grasp any of the concepts, but she doesn't want to get behind because she knows that if she gets behind next year, it's going to be harder because we're going to go into more complicated math, and then she's going to be really behind. And she was basically going on a rant, like she said, I'm probably going to schedule a meeting with my teacher because I don't want to get behind because yada yada yada. And then she was asking me, how long does it take you to finish a math lesson? But what's interesting for me is that what she was talking about, I instantly was just like, could it be possible that the reason why she feels like she can't grasp anything is the same reason that I didn't feel comfortable doing algebra? Because this year before, oh, good news. We made the switch. So I have a new math teacher now.
Right.
So
So you think the same problem you had may be her problem too?
exactly. Yeah, because for
Yeah.
me, it wasn't that I couldn't grasp it. It was just that I didn't like, I've always loved algebra ever since I found out about it in middle school. I always found it fascinating and it's really fun. At least for me. I know that for some people it's a bit harder. But this year when I went into algebra 2 and like we started the course, And the first lesson I did, I got only 12 out of 20. Once I saw that, I felt like I was I felt that I forgot all my algebra knowledge, that I was really bad at it, that I didn't have the confidence to keep moving forward. I went blank and I was just like, no, 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 no. I'm not going to try because I'm not good at it anymore.
Right. So
And
you see how that thinking would probably lead you to being worse to prove the thinking is right.
well, it led me to stop doing my algebra homework for 2 weeks. But then
Yeah, which is certainly not going to get you better at doing algebra.
exactly.
Yeah, so you do the one thing that will actually provide you confidence in the thought you have. Because if the thought's real, you then have to behave in ways that support the thought.
Right.
So let me take it back to the teacher. And I'm not identifying the teacher. We're not talking about her as an individual. But within the confines of sick thinking, if I'm thinking a thought is real and it's not real, everything that stems from that is going to be toxic in some way. So if I'm a teacher and I think I'm doing everything I can, and now I'm abusing the kids because I'm doing everything I can and they're not performing, I don't want them to perform well. Because if they kept performing well, it would disprove the thinking I'm doing.
I couldn't be a teacher.
Well, she would need to be a teacher, but the fact is she's trying to control the thinking she's doing by thinking everyone else is a failure. And so she's helping people achieve that failure by teaching them in ways that are confusing.
I can
or
tell
demanding of them things that are very, very difficult.
I can
Now,
tell right now that sorry to cut you off, but I can tell you
No,
right
no.
now that I have my algebra notebook right here, and after I talked with her and my mom and I, we talked to my homeroom teacher, we talked to the vice principal, and then the vice principal talked to the principal. And once we talked about why I needed a new teacher, and I did this 2 days in a row, right? So the thing
Right.
happened. I talked to my homeroom teacher. I let it all out. I cried because it hurt. And then the next day, I didn't want to talk about it again because it was uncomfortable, but I gave her the basis. And basically, during that process where we were communicating the problem and wanting the solution, after she told me that they were going to make the change, I felt so relieved that I got to work catching up. And I can show you that the first thing that I did was I followed all of her advice because, well, not all of it, but I followed most of her advice because she did have good advice. She told me to rewatch the recordings, and I
How
did.
long did it take you to do the 2 weeks of homework?
I'm still doing that right now. It's
How long has it taken?
well, if I started like last week and I'm only on the 4th lesson of Unit 1, it's taking a while. But look, this is all I've done so far.
But it's going quicker
Yeah, it's going
than
quicker.
thinking you can't do anything.
Exactly. So when I
Okay.
was watching her recording, because she taught the second live lesson, because I missed a lot of her notes because she went so fast. When I was watching her recording, not only was I taking note of the math concepts, but I was noticing those, like how you were saying that since she has those thoughts that everyone's a failure, she's going to make that happen by teaching us in ways that are going to make us feel a failure and be confusing. She literally did that. There were moments, like the one moment that I'm remembering right now, she was introducing the topic of literal equations, which is Unit 1, Lesson 5. And she was asking everyone to put in the chat examples of literal equations. And she was like, okay, I've got a whole bunch. And you know what she said? Because no one was really putting anything in. She was just like, wasting time here. We're wasting time. And when someone tried to correct her, because she made a mistake on a problem, she wrote the wrong variable. And this person corrected her. She was like, "Oh, is that you? Or is that you who's correcting me?" Like she got kind of, how would you explain that behavior? But she got, I guess, defensive. Yeah, she didn't like that she was being corrected, but she would, because she wants everyone to be a failure around her, basically. And I could take note of those behaviors. And there was another moment where someone was saying they have to go because they have another class at 11. And normally I don't have any other classes at 11, but I have seen that other students, if they're like in more advanced classes or they have like other courses, that that they have 2 live lessons in that same day. But you know how she reacted? She reacted, you should have another live lesson at 11. Tell me which live lesson is at 11. That would be fantastic. Thanks. And so when when the student told her that it was a homeroom call, she was like, homeroom is not a class you have to attend at 11. Like, she literally talked like that.
Interesting.
And she changed her face.
The most
All right,
interesting,
so go ahead.
the most interesting part here is more kids out there that they are experiencing the
Like that
same
student I'm talking to you
yeah.
about, that she feels like, well, I don't know if it would be a feel or a think situation, but what would you say? Would it be
It's the same.
or a think situation, or both?
Both. They're both happening simultaneously.
Okay.
And the feelings are generally a little broader than the thoughts because they're more encompassing. They're actually the sum total of the senses and the perception and the thinking we're doing about it, but they're also perceiving things that the senses are telling them in raw data. Thinking is trying to narrow down the sense. The sense is broader, so the feeling is feeling it all. And it's also feeling what's happening around us.
Well,
Which the thinking's trying to come to conclusions that are practical, but to come to a conclusion that's practical that you think is real isn't practical because it seems to not have any changing basis. And that failure, the beauty of failure is the learning. Anybody interested in growth is always interested in failing and noticing what they're doing, because it really isn't failure. It's a reckoning with how things actually are versus how we think they are. Just coming to terms with it. So 2 things. We can look at this from within the thinking and see her as doing what she's doing that's toxic, and how it pollutes the ability to the teacher. Let's just say the teacher isn't this teacher, but just a person who has something to say. And how she's saying it is based on the thinking she's doing that's very self-centered in the idea that our thinking of itself becomes ourself, which it isn't. It's just thinking more about thinking. But when you attach to it as who you are, you begin to defend it because it's the only basis for the idea is defensiveness and reactiveness and being assured that you're right. So any wrong anyone points out is very upsetting, and you need to hammer them down a little bit more, especially when you're an authority, right? You're the teacher. So if she's doing that and you're seeing that, you can easily begin to notice that that isn't working for you, that you don't like it, that you don't like being in that environment, and you can do things about it to change it. That's all within the thinking structure. So what you're taking is something you don't like, you're turning it into something you do like. Perfectly free to do that.
Yes.
It's a healthy way of thinking.
Yes.
Well, it's beginning to see that we don't have to subject ourselves to conditions. Here's the problem. If we're doing the thing that person is doing, we're thinking it's them and not seeing what we're doing. So the greatest advantage we have in perspective, we're giving up by saying it's them, and now I've changed the circumstances, and we become based in circumstances rather than an essence of being that knows better. There's always being, if a knowing nature of knowing always knows, it always knows better than we think. Always. Because it knows everything. It doesn't know some things. It doesn't know those things. It doesn't know these things. It doesn't know the things I think I want. It doesn't know, it knows everything. And to know everything is to distinguish nothing. Nothing stands out as individual or independent because it's the sum total of something that's infinite and seamless and symmetric and synchronous. It's immediate. It's always present. There's nothing else going on, literally. So the advantage is both. We are not condemned to continue in directions we don't like. And we are also free to begin to realize that anything we don't like is a limited thought that we're maintaining.
Yes.
So here's what's interesting. Math is principled, isn't it? There are basic principles. And there are orders of operation, aren't there? Okay. If we're not following the orders of operation of life and reality, we're going to cause a problem with the problem we're trying to solve in math. But we're doing it in life, in our experience. We're creating the same failure by not following the orders of operation. What do they call that? Disorders. Think of all the disorders. Bipolar, ADHD. If I'm paying attention to everything that isn't happening, how much attention do I have to pay to what is happening? And if I'm denying what I'm doing, I'm going to pretend that the most obvious evidence of what's happening isn't happening. I'm creating a formula that serves the interest of the sick idea, which we call ego, or lying, or addiction. I'm serving the interest of that, thinking my life depends on maintaining the thing that's actually killing my body because of the stress and the inability for it to maintain a balance. So it undermines every one of my bodily systems. And what do I feel? Nervous, afraid.
Oh,
And if
that
I look at
out too.
if I look at those body languages and say, I'm nervous and afraid about something I'm doing in relation to this situation, because nothing can impact me more than what's happening in my brain, because nobody else gets to go in there.
Exactly.
The only thing that gets in there are things other people do that I think about. And it's, again, my thinking about what they're doing that's causing the ultimate collision. So now this isn't something to immediately imagine that we're going to be good at if we're just beginning to consider it. But if we're considering that there's an absolute knowing source that's the basis of our existence, that is a very different premise to have thinking function from than imagining that that source is only what I'm thinking, and it's conflict, and it's hate, and it's self-abuse, and it's self-denial, and it's self-absorbed, and it's self-centered, and all these other things that we put to the words, when really it's thinking centered and thinking absorbed and thinking reactive thinking, fighting for a life that doesn't even exist. And we think that becomes our life. It isn't. So the difference is they talk about self-actualized and self-realized in terms of human potential. In biology, at some point, you'll learn about Maslow, and he had a chart. You can look this up during the week, but he had a chart, a pyramid that starts on the most basic needs. We need to breathe, we need to eat, we need water, and all that kind of stuff. If you don't have those needs met, you can't move to the next level because you're going to be desperate. But every one of those levels that's met, you reach this point where they call self-actualized. And my experience is self-actualized is actually realizing what's happening. And that's the ultimate self that we all share, because just like in math, the principles apply to all people doing mathematics in all different countries, in all different ways, on all different platforms, taught by all different people. It's the same principles. They don't change.
Yes.
If I start seeing that that's my basis, and I start seeing it as your basis, I don't hold people in contempt for their failures. I have compassion because I know the suffering I put my own experience through, and I know what they must also be going through. And it just opens the door a little bit to saying, oh, they're really struggling. They're really crying. All the things I thought I was offended by are all cries for help.
Oh.
So what do they do with the help? They think it's an affront. They think it's an attack. Why? Because we're helping them dismantle something they're desperately trying to cling to as though it's real. Their life seems to depend on it. And that can be a very, very difficult thing. We've seen it in this discussion. People react and hang up and disconnect and get pissed off. And what I realized when people are telling stories over and over again, explaining why they're fine and all that, if I interrupt them, they get really angry. Because they're trying to prevent that anger from being revealed by this new story of how good they are and how things appear and I'm fine and everything's great and I just am so thankful for all the things I have and all that. But underneath that is a cauldron, like a volcano waiting. You never know when it's going to explode, but I can be assured that the longer people postpone it, the bigger the explosion. And I think we all have experiences of having little things happen that really piss us off way more than the circumstance would ever warrant, because there's a collection of energy building up in our system. It's not to say we shouldn't do that, but to simply say if we are doing it, it's probably worth noting, recognizing, talking about, and actually having the chance to relieve it as we go by seeing the resistance we're having is what's creating that pressure. We're pushing against something that doesn't exist because we think it exists, rather than see there isn't anything to resist. It's all imagined. It's all insanity to think it's real. And it's an induced form of insanity. And if we have been doing this since the beginning of time, because there's many things that we're coming to terms with in this universe that are newly being noticed, it wouldn't be a surprise that the failure of our own thinking has been consistently failing from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Go back through written history, and you see the calamity that's been caused by people who thought they were right, and as a result, everyone else was wrong. So they made them slaves. They subjected them to oppression and suppression and killed them because they didn't think like the leader did.
Mm-hmm.
That's a weakness.
Yeah.
Because there's no strength in it. And the irony is the strength has never gone anywhere, ever. We're leading a life where we think being numb to what's happening is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
So that when somebody sends a text and all of a sudden lights up all that memory, you realize, wow, there's a lot more going on in me
Mm-hmm.
than I was giving credit to.
Wow.
And that would mean at every moment, the consideration of the possibility as being all possible certainly begins to eliminate the thoughts we have that we think are the only possibility. Starts to melt that. And you realize, oh, if principles, I took algebra the first time in 9th grade and got a D. I took it the second time in 10th grade and failed it. So I gave up.
Right.
When I went back, the teacher said, his name was Don Mazzucchelli, PhD in math and loved the universe. He said, this is the language of the universe. We can talk about everything in the universe with math. And he said, if you think it's complicated, we're going to do functions today. By the time we're done with class today, the first class, you're going to know how to do an algebraic function. So you can't say you don't know how to do it. So he set a stage, and I got 100% of my calculus test eventually on my final. I got a 92, 94, 96, 98, and 100. Every time I failed, I learned. I hammered down those ideas and said, what's nice about principles is that once you learn them, you never have to relearn them.
Because they're the
It's just
same.
like riding a bike.
Yeah.
Qué bello.
So I'm not applauding my experience as much as saying that when I aligned with what he was saying and was able to take advantage of someone who was actually intending for people to succeed, there was a much greater chance of success. So in all of our relationships, we have some of those relationships that we want to see fail because we think we're better than those people, because we're married to thoughts that we think are better than their
Married
thoughts.
to thoughts.
Well, that's why divorce is so popular.
Did you see the story about the woman who married herself and then divorced herself a year later?
That's what we do when we make believe who we are is not who we are.
And she se suicidó.
Oh, and she suicided herself.
Yeah.
She what?
She suicided. Wait, you say suicided herself?
Se suicidó.
Killed herself?
Uh-huh.
She committed
Yeah.
suicide.
Well, and that's the ultimate sense of divorce. If we think who we are is what we think, and then we think killing ourselves kills that self never lived to begin with. It was all imagined to be alive. And suicide today is at an all-time high. It suggests that this thinking has been going on so long as to take the thinking seriously that most people say, I can't take it anymore. What they're talking about is the mental grind, the conflict, the inner turmoil, the emotional turmoil, the mental anguish. They can't take it because it goes on and on and on because they don't think they're doing it. They think what they're doing is right and real. It isn't. It's a mistake. Think of mistake and forgiving. We're mistaking things for what they are.
Oh my gosh.
And when we're forgiving them what they are, we start to just let them be and start to see that what I'm thinking about them is irrelevant to them. And yet I can think anything I want now. I'm not condemned to any thought because I'm not thinking of them as real, and I'm not thinking of my thoughts as reality. I'm thinking of my thoughts as imagined. They're estimates, guesses very often. Best thing I can think in the moment to get the thing I think I want right now.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that they're concreted into my brain until I think they're real and think that that's a building block that can never be moved because I'm putting other lies on top of it and building something that I think is so in place that there's nowhere for it to go. And I start to think I can't think anything other than what I'm thinking. And then I become embarrassed to even mention it. Guilt and shame are very often the common characteristics of people struggling with mental obsession. And you know why? Because they're guilty and they're ashamed. Why? Because we're using things that aren't true as truth. That's a shameful act when you have an absolute, natural, truthful, honest relationship to reality.
So I learned a new way to apply forgiveness. Let the things, voy a decirlo en español, dejar que las cosas que son, como son.
Okay.
Let them be.
Yeah. Let them
Yeah.
be.
Well, here's the beauty of it. They already are. That's the transition, is seeing that it's not now because we think of them that way, but now we're aligning thoughts with how they've always been. Things are always what they are. The moment is always what it is right now. It's always new. It's always facing the potential of all possibilities. That certainly doesn't tell me, if I'm thinking that the only thing I can do is the next stupid thing that I've done forever, thinking that forever is the only thing I have to face. Because there is no forever in a present state. It isn't about forever. It's about present everness, ever presentness. It's about now, and realizing that my sense is the present isn't in time or space, because it can't be quantified. You'll learn that in math at some point, Esther, that you really can't make a point in math. So points can't be made. And yet we as humans fight for the points we think are important and we can make, thinking other people can't make other points. So you know what the point is?
That was
you know what the ultimate.
That was
What's that?
Right?
Yeah, well, and it's also the fact that the points we think we're making are no point. There's no point in making the points when we think they're real, rather than simply seeing them as positions we take that we're free to take, but we're also free to take every other position. And so too is everyone else. Doesn't condemn us or them at all, to see it clearly and honestly and openly.
That is a secret. Yeah.
So some of this, as you walk away from the conversation, you notice, perhaps, I'll leave it to you to describe, but I'll share my experience with people, is they start just noticing that by beginning to think of things in absolute terms, meaning that things are what they are, things are doing what they're doing, the present is happening the way it's happening right now. I'm thinking what I'm thinking, starts to shift. There's an awareness shift of stability and ideas that start coming up that are very inspiring.
Yes.
And very refreshing and very generous. Yes. And very inclusive and embracing. So to embrace the wrong is starting to actually notice that it's our curriculum. It's kind of like going to class, Esther, and you got a book, and the teacher says, read it. And you've got a chalkboard, and they say, look what's on here. I'm telling you information that if you knew it, you wouldn't be in this class.
Right.
So what we're learning is how to function in the present with all that's happening in a way that is productive and useful and helpful and beneficial and generous, because if we can do it one way, it's the same way for everybody.
Exactly. Wow.
If we've been trying to identify ourselves by the individual ideas we had, this is starting to notice that we've all been based on the exact same thing the whole time. And it doesn't mean we can't have independent thoughts, because we can think whatever we want. And we can say whatever we want as a result of what we think. And we can feel whatever we want as a combination of those two things. And we can do whatever we want. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it real. It simply makes it an expression of a choice that we're free to make. And choices can always not be made.
Right.
So there's no addiction in the idea of choice until you make believe, again, fantasy-wise, that there's no other choice. Why would people use choice? Is the idea that there's no other choice, when choice always allows not to be chosen, if they weren't thinking in some twisted, perverted, it's a perversion, another story being told that isn't true.
Wow, wow.
So the man you cared for, Lencis, both your husband and this other guy, the common nature of that freedom that we all share is love.
Yes.
And to know that is to see that you can break a relationship up. You don't have to like being with somebody, and you don't have to stay with somebody. You don't have to like a teacher, and you don't have to stay with them. You don't have to be condemned to condemnation.
Exactly.
But you can also see it from a point of view that's freeing, so you can begin to have a relationship and say, look, I like my second wife, I absolutely love. She's an incredible woman. We just didn't seem to have the makings of working together on a functional basis. So we divorced. It didn't end the love.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate her. I love her. We have fun together. Katie loves her. She's part of the family.
Oh.
And I could do otherwise, but it wouldn't be honest to do that. And I left that door open always, regardless of the circumstances that often felt very difficult.
This
And
is
often could have been seen as an attack against me rather than seen that I'm vulnerable because I have ideas that are very vulnerable. And anything that comes close to it, like the teacher being told that she did something wrong, becomes a justification to try to pretend I have nothing to do with it. Rather than, oh, thank you. That's actually helpful. Thank you. And see the team effort we're capable of as a species, the cooperative capacity we have.
Mm-hmm.
So in walking away from this,
Yes.
beginning to notice that there's a different shift in awareness in relation to everything, it can feel a little confusing at first because
Yes.
it's so different than the calculated nature of, doing this all the time, feeling like every little piece has got to fit in the way I thought it should and would. And if it doesn't, I'm, rather than seeing it as something that shouldn't happen, start to say, well, if it's happening, whether I think it should or shouldn't be happening, it doesn't change what's happening. Maybe I want to have that relationship with it rather than the one I think I should have.
Mm.
And I can do both. I can still think I should have it. I can still think obsessively. But when I start doing it, it makes no sense to continue because I'm seeing it accurately and wholly rather than in a piece that I think is the only piece, the only position, the only thought I can have.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Today, I learned something so powerful, Jack, about how to apply forgiveness. I feel different. I feel like, and I can apply this in every experience that I know I am like, I don't like how I feel thinking about this or what happened. So,
And you know why you don't like how you feel? Because you know it's wrong. This is beginning to see how our body language is so perfectly tuned to teach us what's going on. And what do we do in that sick thinking? Think we need to feel better than that feeling rather than say, wait a minute, this feeling is telling me I'm wrong because of what I'm thinking. It's what I'm doing. It's actually an accurate assessment. I can say thank you for feeling wrong and bad rather than what I need to do is feel better. I need to go run. I need to go run 30 miles. I need to go get a bag of potato chips.
Yes. Oh, you know what, Jack? Ask Esther. Many times when I was facing a uncomfortable situation, you know what I wanted?
She'd get cravings.
Yeah, exactly.
For either sweet things like cupcakes
Yes.
and cookies and cake, or one day she ate an entire cake herself. Because I think it was her birthday or something, or maybe it was just an extra cake, but it was like she ate a cake. She ate I only ate one piece because I don't eat a lot of sugar. It's just like too much for me. And she ate the entire
It's too much for her too, by the way, but that was her proof.
It was too much. She got sick afterwards.
Yeah, but that was her way of proving she was in control of the sick thing she was doing, so she acted out in that way. Here's what's interesting. In alcoholism, it's a physical allergy. An allergy is an abnormal reaction. So what's the abnormal reaction? Keep doing the wrong thing over and over and over again. What's the normal action? If it's wrong, stop, correct, start, right? So what's attached to that abnormal reaction is a craving. What's the craving? I have to have, I have to have, I have to have, I have to have. And you know what happens? Enough is never enough. So if you can have as much as possible, it's still not enough. You need more. You need more. You need more. You know why? Because the thought has no basis whatsoever. And you're trying to make up for the thought within thinking. So the sick idea is pursuing the sick idea, leading to a sick manifestation physically, a sick behavior, a sick action. And it's always going to go that way. To think that we should feel better about it is to think that that mechanism is going to go away that we don't think we're doing while that thing is continually acting on us and we feel caught off guard, meaning that we're also always on guard. We're admitting by being caught off guard, we're always on guard. What would we be guarding if it were strong and real and true and all powerful? Nothing. There's nothing that can defend that. There's nothing that needs to defend it because it's not at risk. All that's at risk is what's going on inside of our mentality,
Exactly.
which
Yeah.
isn't reality. It's simply our misuse of what we have.
Exactly. It's so powerful what you are saying, Jack. You know what? I like to read the Bible. The Bible talk, voy a decirlo en español. La Biblia dice, en todo lo bueno, en todo lo que es justo, en todo lo que es precioso, en todo lo que tiene un buen significado, piensa en eso. Todo lo que sea de bueno, bueno.
Okay.
It expresses the infinite.
No, she's saying that there's a verse in the Bible that says, think in everything that's pure and everything and all that is honest, all that is just, all that is pure, all that is lovable,
Yeah.
and all that it has, well, all that has a good name.
Mhm.
That's how it's literally translated, but
Yeah.
A good name.
like,
Good name. Yeah.
sí,
good
todo
name.
lo que
Well-
es buen nombre.
But
But it may be the right definition. The good name is the right definition, beginning to actually call things what they are rather than think of them as they're not.
Mhm.
The idea that delusion is what it is thinking of something as it's not.
Exactly.
And then the thinking of it is all that it becomes, rather than see that the thinking of it
Mhm.
gives us a sense of separation, a sense of aloneness, because we're actually thinking now that what we're thinking of the thing is real rather than the thing being real. And what we think is what we're thinking. That's very different.
Exactly.
So it becomes moralistic rather than immoral,
Mhm.
because we can say, hey, I'm doing that. I can feel it. I can feel wrong and admit I'm thinking something wrong, that the choices I'm making are causing this. Nature isn't causing this.
Mhm.
Nature isn't saying all of a sudden, I'm pissed and I'm going to screw with you.
No.
Nature always seems to do what nature does, which is continue to thrive in some respect or another. Even things that don't provide an avenue for something new that does, always.
Wow.
So if that's our nature, like that, one of the first things that I remember you saying, Esther, was that when you realized that feelings were natural, you stopped thinking of them as something that was attacking you, that was unnatural,
Hmm.
something to that degree.
I do not remember saying that, by the way, but I like your interpretation of it.
Well, you said something to the effect that when you heard that feelings are natural, it was easier for you to have your feelings.
Right.
Yeah. So the difference is if I'm thinking I'm not thinking what I'm thinking I shouldn't feel what I'm feeling. So what do I think? I'm not feeling what I'm feeling. So what am I feeling? Numbness. I'm trying to go numb. Numbness always only happens in bodies when something's wrong. The body's trying to protect us from the pain. So it's telling us, numbness is telling us something's wrong, just like pain is telling us something's wrong. And to think of them as things that shouldn't be happening is to refuse to receive the information that's naturally being provided us. And I think that was the point. I don't know how it was even said. We talked about it at dinner.
Right.
And I think your mom pointed that out at first. But the point was that to think of them as true is to think of you as those things. So the feelings, if you feel bad, you think you're bad rather than I'm having bad thoughts. Very big difference. Because when I think my thoughts are real, I think I'm in my thoughts. I think my back's up against the thought like a bubble trying to protect it so it never gets popped by somebody else's point. Because you can pop a balloon with the needle, but you can't do it with the bat. So I can take an enormous amount of pressure and nothing happens. But if somebody actually admits that it's a bubble and you're in it, you think you're in it, you're not in it, boom, there is no bubble. There was never any bubble. It was all an imagined thought. So all these things that we're seemingly struggling with are only happening in our own thinking.
Exactly.
That's it. Yours and mine. If we can talk about it more accurately, we can think more functionally because we're starting to actually utilize thinking in the proper order. Being first, thinking follows. Reality first, thinking is of reality. It isn't the creator of reality. It's coming from reality. It's a process. We're channeling now, expressing. You were saying something in your Spanish about an expression. If I heard it right, I don't know well enough to hear it clearly, but you were talking about it, the expression being used, I think, in the Bible.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. La Biblia
Yeah.
dice que
So expressing for us is talking. feeling, acting, all those things are expressions. If we're sick in our thinking, all those expressions are going to be sick, and we're not going to think we're feeling what we're feeling. So we're going to act in ways that give us these, we're going to be very leery about anybody who gets close to us because they may notice that we're doing what we don't think we're doing. So that's the big secret that I have to hide all the time. And I'm embarrassed about what I do anyhow. I get in front of people and don't really want to talk because I think any of those eyes may be seeing something that I don't want them to see because they're seeing through the image, the mirage that I'm perpetuating, this projection of ideas.
Wow.
So it's practice, exercise, like we're doing, just talking about it and then contemplating it. If this knowing awareness is a knowing awareness that we all have, then beginning to even think about it will start having thoughts that are so creative and so wonderful and so splendid and so spontaneous and so extraordinary that you'll have an experience of the wonder of life rather than wonder why you keep wandering looking for it. You're starting to find it's here. It's never been something that's absolute can't be lost. So it can't be found. To think we're going to go look for it is to think it isn't here. To think it isn't here is to go into another delusional state.
That reminds me of, have you ever heard of the artist Charlie Mackesy? He's an artist slash author.
I haven't.
He wrote a book called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, and then he made a short movie about it, like animating the story. And basically it starts off, we're in the middle of nowhere, basically. It's just a snowy place, and there's this little boy, and he's sitting down, and then this mole comes out of the ground, and he's like, hello. It's like, hi, what are you doing here? And the boy says that he's lost. And so in the end, so this whole time he's been looking for a home. And he says that a home is somewhere warm, kind, with lights, right? And in the end, he was already home. His like the love of his animal friends that he meets were his home. And it's really cute because in the end, he meets the fox and the horse, obviously. And so in the end, he sees a physical home and he's like goodbye, and he's about to leave, but then something changes in his mind. He's like, no, home isn't always a place, isn't it? And so he comes back to his animal friends, and then they do the cutest thing. They cuddle up together underneath the stars, and they look up together, and there's a shooting star, right? And so the boy asks them, so you know all about me? And they're like, yes. And you still love me? And the horse says, we love you all the more. And he says, I don't know why it's making me cry because it's just so cute, but he says, that's why we're here, isn't it? Or to the mole ask for cake. No, to love and be loved.
Yeah. And do you see how the inspiration of that thought will melt ideas in your head that are actually the tears that you cry in wonder and splendor and inspiration? It's really beginning to come to terms with the fact that we've tried to harden ourselves to something that is never going to be hard. It's not going to be hard in terms of being hard and solid. It's not going to be hard in terms of being complicated and difficult. Either way. And that's a beautiful story. Now, think of stories. Stories, when I was a kid, they used to say the moral of the story is, you don't hear that anymore. Because most of the stories being told are excuses for why we shouldn't be where we are and don't have what we want and need to be somewhere else with someone else and more or less of something else before we're okay.
Yeah, it's not
they're
moral.
They're immoral. Yeah, it's an immoral concept. So the storytelling we use to justify the things we are just excuses. And you know what's interesting, which we all heard? There is no excuse. People say there is no excuse. There is no excuse for excuses, except more excuses. So something excusing itself as an excuse, what's it excusing? The uselessness of it, complete, utter nonsense of it. Now, we can talk about things, and I justify things all the time because I don't quite feel right with them and haven't fully come to terms with them. And I say all the time, not all the time, but enough to notice that it's something I do and seem to be caught off guard by because circumstances are always adjusting and seem to be overwhelming at times and seem to be not what I expected, which tells me my thoughts about what's happening I thought were real. So all that should be happening is what I thought should be happening rather than what's actually happening.
Mhm.
But I don't have to be mired in that and feel like there's nothing I can do about it when I start admitting it's what I'm doing that's causing it now. And then I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't make any sense. Or if I want to make more sense out of it, I'll continue. If I want to act like an idiot, I'll continue.
Mhm.
It's not required. And that was a beautiful story to end on today, because fairy tales were originally designed to help morals become obvious
Right.
for people, and it hasn't continued today. I think we're really struggling with this whole idea of responsibility and morality, and it isn't just someone else's morality. It's the nature of nature that's moral. It's the nature of nature that's real. It's the nature of nature that is response-able. Reactivity is a defensive posture. It's fighting for an idea because I don't want anybody to get near me and uncover this idea I think is my reality and who I am. And you're attacking me, people would say.
Yes.
When you simply admit something you see in them. The observation is giving them perspective that they can't have. Like that idea we're in our thoughts, we think like we never see our eyeballs, yet we know if we open our eyes, they'll see if we have sight.
Yeah.
And this is the same thing with thinking. Once I think I'm in my thoughts, I have no perspective anymore. I think I am my thoughts. I think I become defined by my thoughts rather than my thinking becomes defined. My choice to think what I think becomes defined by my thoughts.
Exactly.
So I love you too,
Oh,
and all that you're connected to. And I appreciate the chance to do this with you as mother and daughter. And also, as I said to you, Esther, being a teenager, talking about this, there's a lot of kids struggling right now with what's going on. And my sense is kids are clearer than the adults because they haven't accumulated the lies as long as the adults have and made believe they're true so long that they feel that to give them up would completely destroy their life rather than begin to actually reveal the life they've always had in terms that are accurate enough to be appreciated rather than feel depreciated and depressed over.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's a growth. It's a wisdom of awareness. In an infinite sense, there's nothing that can grow or shrink, because there's no spatial. It's a dimension that isn't even a dimension. It's beyond our ability to really grasp. But if we contemplate it, you'll begin to see that a lot of the little thoughts you have begin to melt very quickly, because it seems irrelevant to pay so much attention to this as though this is all that's happening. Why does the world look like my fingers when I put my hands in front of my eyes? All the world is a bunch of fingers. Like that would be crazy. It's silly to think that. And it's exactly what we're doing in our thinking by focusing on it and thinking because we look so closely, it's all that there is. When that's a choice.
Cuando es una
So
una choice. Es un
Decisión.
decisión.
Did you see what I sent in the chat?
I didn't.
Oh. I don't know where your chat is, because on mine it's on the bottom.
I don't know.
That movie is
It's the link
I
to
don't tend to pay attention to them. I mean,
Um,
I get when I download afterward, I can see them.
yes.
Can you see your mute and stop video and then your participants? Can you see all that at the bottom?
Yeah, I can see chat. Okay.
So if you click on
So
that,
there's a chat.
you have a big
So that's
different.
a link to what you were talking about.
It's a really
Okay.
short, and it came
Send
out.
that to me. Send that to me in a text, because I'll lose the link once I download the thing.
I can do that. Let me.
Okay. So I'm going to end now.
Vale.
And I want to appreciate you guys. I want to tell you how much I appreciate that we do this, and that you're willing to do this with mother and daughter as a team of two people who clearly are committed to one another. And Lencis, you've done an excellent job being a mother. It's not an easy job to do. It's a very difficult job, because the amount of care you have for your own child is probably as much as you can ever imagine. And yet we're talking about imagining having that same regard for everybody, because we begin to recognize that everything we're doing is affecting everybody. And if that's the case and we're not doing very well, we're not doing very well in our effect on everybody and with everybody. So it's probably worth noting as a species that we might want to wake up a little bit rather than make believe that delusion, this trance that we're in, is actually reality. So I appreciate you guys participating, because my sense is in conversation, it's easy for people to find themselves in the triangulation of the Holy Trinity rather than the unholy. Even the unholy Trinity becomes obvious to people too, because they can see where they may be failing and struggling and start to notice that it's actually coming from the thinking they're doing, and they've been given the right to do. We are all free to think what we want. That's interesting that we would claim not to think what we're thinking because we don't like the results. Rather than see, if I'm doing that, I may be able to correct the thinking. I may be able to get better at the thinking I'm doing, and at least admit the thinking I'm doing is the thinking I'm doing, and that at least would be aligned to start with, have a relationship to it that's at peace rather than further conflicted. What were you going to say, Esther?
I had an idea. You can let me know what
Uh-oh.
about it. No, it's not a bad idea, silly. I was wondering if it would be okay for next time that I could share my screen and we could watch that little movie. It's only like 34 minutes, so it's not too long. And this call was like 2 hours, so like you can watch it, we can react to it, and then you can talk about it. And if you like, maybe you can play it in the actual meeting with more people to see. Because I personally, the first time we watched it, we both cried. It's really beautiful. And I've watched it like 100 times over the 2 years.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put the link in because this is shot live between us, but nobody else. There's nobody out there listening right now.
Right.
So the only people that listen are going to listen to a recording, but within the intro, I can put the link and people could click through to it and then watch it on their own and see what they think.
Yes.
Because that would be a good offering to anybody who ever comes and listens to this recording anyhow. So, okay, I'll do that.
But would you also like to watch it like one-on-one, us, like you watch it too? Because you've never seen it before, and I'd like to see how you would react to it.
Well, we could do that during the week between us.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
At some point. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't know when yet, but when will be easy to figure out.
Yes,
we said the same thing.
we can play
What?
it.
We said we
You can what?
at the same time.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing that I
Thank
want
you.
is thank you, Jack, because if love wasn't there in your soul and all your energy, this
wouldn't work.
Exactly.
Well, and here's the proof of what's wrong is actually proving what's right. We know what's wrong because we know what's right. That's a very revealing. If love didn't exist and all life was this conflicted, alone state, we would feel fulfilled. We'd actually feel great being alone. We'd feel excellent being depressed because it would be the only thing we could do. Animals don't run around killing themselves.
Oh,
they just look for food. They're just always busy trying to eat and take care of their bodies.
That's like, remember that story I was talking to you about called The Giver, where everything is black and white? And so everyone, basically, it's a dystopian society where everyone is perfect in the sense that they don't feel emotions. They don't do, like, I think in the movie, we also watched the movie for it. I think there was a scene where they would like inject themselves or something. Like they would literally do something so like they wouldn't feel throughout the day. But there were people who could feel, and that was called The Giver. And it was this boy who was training to become, and he met this, obviously he had to like go through this process. And during that process, he began to see color, he began to feel emotion, and he could basically like time travel, and he could see what life is like other than their little community. And he could see everything else that was wrong. And he started to feel love because there was this girl he liked, but then he like started to feel for her. So it's really interesting. I haven't read it since 7th grade, but this is reminding me of that.
Yeah.
This concept has been in the world. I'm not sure that it's been affiliated with addiction the way we're talking about it, because addiction by modern standards had only really come to terms back in the 30s, where it was identified and started to be worked on with people in the 12 steps. That was one of the first major transitions of helping alcoholics become non-drinkers. While they remained alcoholics, they didn't drink. That was a freedom that hadn't really been discovered within human history. People were killed, sent to prison, alienated, put on land far away. They were rejected in society and like criminals. And really, they were struggling from a disease. So this disease is a mental issue. It's based in the thinking. It's based in what we each choose, because we're free to choose what we want. And to begin to see that is to begin to see the effect we can have on correcting and growing and changing we're always changing, but to change for the better to change for the benefit of all is a very different thing than simply changing to get worse.
Right.
So we're talking about growing up.
Mhm.
I got to go. Love you guys. Be well. Peace. We'll see. I'll see you. We'll do this again too. We're going to do this again.
Yeah. And
This is number one.
you know why why I want you to watch the movie? Because a lot of the things you're saying are going to come up in
Yes.
little. So I
Yes,
want to
it's
see your
exactly-
reaction. It's
yeah.
very similar, but
Yeah.
it's cuter because it's little animals talking.
Yeah, and it's beautiful, Jack. It's exactly what
Yeah,
you are
it's really
sharing.
similar.
Yeah,
very similar.
It's beautiful.
Okay.
And we love you, Jack.
Thank you.
have no idea how much I respect
you.
you and I love you. Thank you for
Well, and love is inseparable. So it's what we always share. What we're learning to do is express what we already have rather than something that we think we're giving.
Yeah.
That's very different than giving shit to people by making believe that somehow all we have to give is shit. So
I know.
see you both.
Yes,
Peace.
say
Bye.
hi
To Katie.
to Katie.
I will.
And
I
we
will.
love her.
Yes, thank you.
And oh my God, thank you. Jack, I need to tell you something before you go. I wasn't feeling well, okay, for the past week because of that text message and all that things came from
Yeah.
and thank you. Oh my gosh, I feel so happy, but I want to cry. I don't know.
Well, but let the tears go. That's a part of your expression. There's a decompression in that, like there is in laughter. It's a release and a relief, and it's designed to relieve the stress that's been pent up in our systems. And what my experience was is that the iciness that I built up inside started to melt. So I was warmer. And it was the warmth of the light that was beginning to melt that ice that kept me feeling numb. Ice is generally used to become numb. If I'm trying to hide behind being cold, that is not a good. Our bodies run at 98.6 degrees. We're almost 100 degrees and we're trying to act cool. Think about that. That's crazy.
Don't be cool.
I wanted to.
I gotta go.
Okay.
I gotta go.
We need to
We're
talk
gonna
about-
continue.
Yes.
We're gonna
To
continue.
be continued.
Jack,
Love you guys.
bye.
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 Besos, adios.
Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you very much. You too.
Bye.